apart from that, we certainly know that he was a great poet. We call him the Sommo Poeta, the supreme poet, and we also call him the father of Italia. And I'm going to explain you why he is the father of Italia. When Dante lived, he lived in Italy at that time was not a united country. There were many cities. We call feudi, and each cities they had also different principles for each city, and each city had own language, own dialect, which is still true here today. Italy is united, but there are regions, and each region has own language. Own language is a dialect, and we still speak dialect, but the official language is Italian. And you know why? Because of Dante. Because at the time, the language that was used to, it was the Latin. And the Latin was the language of the rich and doctors. Not even the women could access to Latin. Dante decided to give back the culture to the vulgar. He decided to get a language, a Florentine language, a dialect from the vulgar, and started to write not in Latin, but in Italian, that will become the official language for literature. So that's why we call Dante the father of Italian language. Also, at that time, to understand more Dante as a person, because Dante was not only a poet, he was a politician. At that time, there were two parties in Italy. Yes, two parties, wealthy and Ghibelline. The Ghibelline was for the emperor, the wealthy was for the poor. Dante's family belonged to the wealthy part, so they were following the poor. But Dante realized how the church at that moment was corrupt, because for Dante there were two powers. One was the temporal power, and the other one was the spiritual power. The temporal power was for the state, the emperor. The spiritual power had to be for the church. But the church was expanding its dominion. The church wanted also the temporal order. So Dante fight the Pope, at the time was a Bonifacio, and that's why he had to go away from Florence, was exiliated for years, and then he never came back, and he died in Ravenna.
Where did he die? Where did he die?
In the 113 something.
In what place?
Ravenna.
Ravenna.
Ravenna. Ravenna. And he's still, the tomb is still there.
So, 100?
113,
1500.
Yeah, 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
1321.
Yeah.
Oh, so before the Renaissance.
Oh yes,
way before.
This is another thing. So even if the Renaissance was after, he is considered the precursor of that.
Yeah.
Because of the question of the language first, because and also for the way in which he was looking at the women. I mean, then Simona will talk more deeply about this. So he is a precursor.
So these pictures you're showing there, they're actually painted much later, though.
Yes. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they didn't even have.
Do you have several images of Dante in terms of portraits, but also in terms of illustrations of his poems?
Okay.
And are just illustrations by a British woman, and she was painting actually, drawing between 19th century,
1800s.
yeah. No, it was in the 19th century.
Oh, wow.
Century, which means
Yeah. And we had also very nice frescoes and paintings from Botticelli, another very famous Italian painter, from Giotto as well. And this is, we chose these images because the purpose of the lady, of this lady, was to try to create images, illustrations who are accessible to everyone, because these are images that you can find in books. Otherwise, the paintings would be in specific place and not everyone could have access. So there is an accessibility reason behind the choice. And it's very interesting because she's one of the few who illustrated also the Vita Nuova, that is the new life, the first poem of Dante. And normally the other painters are focused on Divina Commedia, the big poem of Dante. So the interesting aspect is also the fact that she's focusing on something that is not so commonly studied, but she wanted also to give representation to this big journey in the heart of Dante when he met Beatrice the first time. And this is something happening in this first poem called La Vita Nuova in Italian, that is the new life. And we will say a little bit more later. Before saying that, I would like to say something more about the relationship between Dante and the church. The church at the time of Dante was a real inclusive institution, and it was affecting almost every aspect of the life, not just the religious, but also the social and economic life of the people. And Dante, who was very involved also in the political and social life of Florence, of his hometown, he entered into conflict with the church, exactly because he was considering that the church was not doing exactly what it was supposed to do. For Dante, the church has only to focus on spiritual issues and mainly on how to lead people to look for salvation. And the church at that time was focused on very different aspects. And in particular for Dante, the cause of this shift in the focus of the church was exactly due to Pope Bonifacio VIII. And Dante defines Pope Bonifacio VIII as the prince of the new Pharisee. I don't know if the English word is the last one. Pharisee, exactly. And this because the Pope had purchased his election and had transformed the holy place of St. Peter into a sewer. So, these were very concrete aspects according to which they say there is something wrong in this church. And also the church was very rich. It held a lot of material possession, and the origin of this corruption was exactly the donation of Constantine, when Constantine received a lot of material and goods. And so Dante is starting to use the language, the writings, in order to reform also the church. He wanted to have the two powers divided, and of course the church should have been the spiritual arm, and the emperor should have been the material arm of God. God was always as a reference, but of course the role of the two institutions was different. And another interesting aspect is that Dante appreciated a lot the the vision and the spiritual choice of the Franciscans. He loved the Franciscan and the message of St. Francis, but differently from their vision in how to reform the church, he wanted he was saying that the purity of the Christianity could be regained only if the emperor were totally powerful and the clergy totally poor. So something coming from outside for the reformation of the church. For the Franciscan, the spirituals of the Franciscan, the reformation should come from within the church. So this is a little bit of the difference between the two positions. And there is another interesting aspect on how Dante was looking at this struggle and tension between the emperor and the church, because of course in the Divina Commedia, in the Divine Comedy, Dante chooses a lot of holy figures to be the mouthpiece for the denunciation of the corruption. Let's think to St. Thomas, St. Peter, St. Benedict. But he has also chosen Beatrice to speak against the corruption of the church. And this is exactly one of the new innovations, is to give to a woman the role of speaking against the church. And the women, I mean, St. Paul had forbidden to women to speak and to be involved publicly in this kind of affairs. So Dante is starting, he seems to be a very progressive, very modern poet, also in consideration to the role provided to women, because he chose exactly Beatrice in order to speak against the corruption of the church. And this is very interesting. This is a very interesting aspect.
Beatrice was not only like the starlet, the beautiful woman that can be only beautiful and safe. Beatrice can talk of a serious topic, serious argument for the first time, and not even in Latin. She can talk in the Divina Commedia in Italian.
So Beatrice, or Beatrice, she was the main character in the Divine Comedy, or?
One of. She was one of the guides of Dante. The main, so in the hell, there was Virgilio. Virgilio was the guide of Dante through the hell, but because Virgilio is a pagan, he couldn't lead him to the paradise. So from the end to the purgatorio, limbo, purgatorio, then to the paradise is going to be Beatrice. So it's like, he put a big poet, a master poet like Virgilio, and Beatrice, a normal woman at the same level. This is, I mean, if I see now, and if I see all the battle that the women have been through to, to say, hey, I am someone, I am a person, I have rights. It was very, very progressive at that time. It was the first one.
Yeah, Beatrix, she's the protagonist of another poem, and I will speak a little bit more about that. This is the first poem Dante wrote that is called The New Life, La Vita Nuova in Italian, and she's exactly, the center of the big revolution that he's taking Dante and through which he's explaining in this poem. But I think before we can say a little bit more about Beatrice in general, the role she had and what was she representing in the entire society.
So the New Life was the first poem, and then the Divine Comedy.
Yeah.
Were they very long poems?
The New Life is composed, it's a big poem constituted by 31 smaller poems, 31 chapters.
Oh, wow.
So it's long, but not so long like the Divina Commedia.
So it's not what we think of as a poem right now. Because I think of a poem as just...
No. No, it's not like a one page, no way.
I mean, we call it the opera. It's an opera of Dante, but the poem. But I mean, the insider parts are called sonetti or canzonis in Italian. I mean, these, poetically speaking, these are two different kind of metrics and two different kind of poetic models. The sonetti are shorter, and the canzone are longer and a little bit more articulated. And also the kind of metrics used in each of them is different.
What do you mean by metrics?
Neither.
The way it sounds. Oh,
No, metrics is something different. Metric is something.
The sonic versus
The type of the verse is exactly used in constructing the verse. And matters? And
You might want to save questions until the end if we have an end, because we're pressing on.
yeah, sorry.
yeah, okay, we will be trusting.
Okay, so yeah, I want to say a little bit about Beatrice. We don't know many things about her actually. We know what Dante wrote about her, but he didn't describe her physically. For instance, we have really once he said something about emerald eyes, so maybe she had green eyes, and pale skin and green eyes. That's what we know. And we don't know how the painter painted her. I mean, just it's a representation of her. So what we know that Dante met Beatrice just twice. The first time when he was 9 years old and was love at first sight. And then they met again, but they even didn't talk. So we don't know how this love came from. And she died when she was 24 years old. So apart from that, we don't really know about her real life. But what we know is, again, is the way in which the first time a woman was described by a poet who was also a politician, so and who was given to the woman a different picture. And do you want to talk about
I think Vita Nova could help us to understand a little bit more the role of Beatrice and what this poem meant to Dante. La Vita Nova, the new life, is Dante's first major work. As I said before, is composed of 31 poems, lyrics, and what is original of this poem is that these lyrics are accompanied by prose. After each lyrics, Dante describes in a narrative way what he wrote in a lyric. And so this combination of lyrics and prose is making something new about this poem. And is the first great example of prose forged into an instrument for expressing dramatic experiences of life, like a flash of romantic love, like the sublimation of this love, like the apocalyptic vision of the death of the beloved, and also the certainty of the beatitude in the heaven. So it's a journey that is represented in this poem. And the new life refers exactly to the youth of Dante. He met Beatrice when he was 9, and Beatrice was 8. They met the second time when they were 18, so 9 years after, and a few years after Beatrice died. And both were married, so both were involved in different sentimental affairs. But when Dante saw Beatrice for the first time, something happened. And this is exactly the content of the third lyric in the poem. If we have time, we can read just a small piece of this lyric because it's very powerful. But when Dante saw Beatrice, something happened. And what is also interesting about, and generally speaking about this poem, is that this poem is called the Book of Memory because Dante is writing it after the events, so he's doing a sort of journey into the memory, remembering what is happening. And also it's a poem in which he's using both the Latin and the Italian. And of course, the use of Latin has a double role because on one side it indicates, it serves for providing dignity and nobility to the poem. The Latin is the high language, the high tone. But on the other side, as Deborah was saying before, Latin was used just by name. And also, speaking in Latin means that, in one sense, Dante is recognizing that this woman is producing something inside him, but on the other side, he wants to maintain, the male dominance of what is happening. And the use of Latin, that was just the language used by male, is exactly because he wants to regain the control over this situation. The opening statement of Vita Nuova, a new life, is Incipit Vita Nova in Latin. That means here begins a new life. And this is exactly the opening statement for paving the way to a unique world of youthful love and the poetic vision. And the word of Dante in Vita Nova is indeed a word inspired by a truly human love, grafted into feelings of profound religious spirit. So there is this combination of the two. And Dante, in this poem, shows us the ideal harmony between the art and life he was trying to achieve in his life. And he's using exactly the writing as the way to try to achieve this nice balance. And so what is interesting about this poem is that there is a combination about a personal experience, but with something that has a universal meaning. And the universal meaning is exactly to reach the God's will, to do the God's will, and to be a good person in life, without vices, but only with virtues. So the idea is exactly to try to start from a very human experience that is very painful because something is going to happen with Beatrice, but at the same time is a way to try to reach God and to be in the Beatitude. And indeed, when Beatrice is represented in this poem, she is saying, enjoying the glory of the paradise. So she's described as the glorious lady of my mind. In Italian we say gloriosa donna della mia mente, glorious lady of my mind. And she is enjoying already the beatific vision in the heaven. And Dante refers to Beatrice as the gracious, gentilissima, as blessed, benedetta, and as salvation. That means that she's really the one who could save him. But how does this salvation happen? Because we have said that Dante met Beatrice when he was 9, And he started to dream about her, he started to dream about this love, he started to think about this love. Then he met her again when 9 years after, and the meeting is very important because when they met again, Beatrice greeted him. And these greetings changed Dante's life. And in the poem, and this description of the greetings is found in chapter 10. When Beatrice is greeting Dante, he's going back to his room, and he started to sleep, and he made a dream. He made a dream in which he saw Beatrice in the arms of love, this nice big figure, and it's interesting because what Beatrice is doing, she's eating the bloody heart of Dante. And the bloody heart means this heart full of love. So we have this second moment in this poem that is really the apotheosis of the meeting between the two. And Dante is starting to write exactly the most powerful verses. And he's writing something like, it is clear that in her greetings lay my beatitude. So it's already something extremely strong. And the third very important moment in this process, in this journey, is when some time after, Dante was walking in the street, and I have to say something before for helping you to understand this moment. Dante was starting to love Beatrice, but the kind of love that was described publicly was kept secret. You have not to reveal the name of your love, and there is this discretion, this secrecy. And Dante, even if encountered some revelation in his life, at the same time he was concerned of keeping this love secret, of keeping the rest of the world not knowing what was going on. And so she was choosing other ladies, like the screen ladies, the so-called screen ladies, in order to avoid that his admiration and love for Beatrice was coming out publicly. And but was exactly the reason why at one point, sometimes after the second encounter, when Beatrice greeted him, that they met again, and Beatrice refused to greet him again, exactly because of the rumors about the fact that he was interested with other women. And this is the third moment in which something is going to happen. And of course, the fact that Beatrice didn't greet him is the point of crisis. Dante went back to his room, and he started to suffer a lot. He fell ill as well for 9 days. There is this 9 number that is coming back all the time. But at the same time, he realized that this was something that has to transform. Beatrice was not beating him, something was lost, but at the same time he realized that this was exactly the moment in which he had to elevate himself even more. And this moment, extremely painful, extremely hard, was described and changed by Dante as the moment in which the earthly love died for having a new, very spiritual and high love created. And this is exactly the role of these events. And after this event, he wrote another very famous lyrics called Ladies, You Who Can Understand Love. And this is very interesting because we have seen a sort of journey that we have done with Dante. And if we have to say, and if Vita Nuova, the new life, asks the question, what is love? There are many answers. Love is a condition of desire. Love is an emotional state. But love is also a condition of language. It is a philosophical problem that requires thought and faith, and also is a problem of feeling, expression, but also feelings. So Dante is really representing with this poem the poets of its time, and they open up to the possibility of love as something of a theological problem. So there is this connection that has started to be done by them. And this is very interesting because it's a way of finding behind physical desire a partner of Christian understanding.
Yeah, and let's say that at the end of his journey, Dante, after in the Vita Nova described Beatrice in a more, let's say, also carnal way, in the Divina Commedia, he ended with another description. Now Beatrice became divine. So now Beatrice she's more spiritual than corporal, and yeah.
I'm sorry to ask you a question at this point. You seem like you're skirting really close to the Virgin Mary.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could distinguish
Exactly.
in terms of his point of view.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Beatrice is all. I mean, the first time that he sees Beatrice at the end of the Purgatorio, it's like she's like a cloud, in a cloud with a veil, a white veil, and she was never described with a white veil. And also she is like God in this sense. So the first time that they saw, Dante was looking for Virgilio, but Virgilio disappeared. Dante started to cry because he was in discomfort, because he was left alone, and when he saw Beatrice, he saw this powerful image of a kind of a different person that he could, and Beatrice was very tough. She said, hey, why are you crying? There are other things to do it. Here in the heaven, there are no places for mistakes. We have to go. So actually, I would try to read you in Italian and then in English. Guardaci ben son Beatrice, come degnassi d'accedere al monte? Non sapei tu che qui è l'uomo felice? Now in English, which is worse for me. Okay. Look over here. I truly am Beatrice. How did you dare approach the mountain, which is the earth? Do you know that here man lives in joy? So, as I said, in a paradise, there is no room for mistakes. There is no room for regrets. So we have to go. With me, he will lead Dante to Paradise, like a mama, like more a Virgin Maria, than a spouse or concubine or whatever. So a very different role.
And we're just, some of us have to leave, so we'll stay and ask questions and continue.
Is it time
People
for
have to
service?
go.
Yes. Oh.
Can go, and the rest
Yeah, we can answer.
What?
But there's some questions, so go ahead and continue, and the people that have to go can leave, and others can stay.
Thank you for
staying.
Fascinating.
So is that a time when he was, that there were arranged marriages? At that time, was he in arranged marriage?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
he pretty much was stuck.
Oh, yes, yes.
So
he
he
was.
raised her up because he felt this
Yeah.
desire.
Beatrice was married with a very rich and elder
Wait, she was from a
man.
very rich family, or he was?
He was.
She was a different class.
She was
Yeah,
very rich, was a bank.
She was from a rich class too, huh?
And he was aristocratic family, but no rich.
Not
Ah,
so well.
oh,
Not so
Right.
well.
Okay, so she was all unreachable.
She was a rich girl.
You know, but what is interesting, I think, is the fact that many scholars have tried to understand why
there was
Dante,
this
I mean, start to desire so much Beatrice, and why his love was starting in such a way, because there are no material meetings they had, there was no practical moments in which. But
It's
Just like, just that fire.
It's a love at first sight.
But at the
Yeah,
same
well,
time, there should be
9-year-old.
something that really happened between
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
And then he tried to sublimate, in one sense. He tried really to use this encounter. It couldn't become anything else.
Right.
Like a way to become a better person.
Right.
And to help people to, to make this kind of spiritual journey.
Right. Well, he couldn't have her in the corporal sense. He could only have her in a spiritual sense.
I think so. I think so, but also, there is no very detailed description of his desire of her in a corporal way that could have happened. But this is something that he has always lacked. So I
Because
don't
they
know.
don't talk about it.
Exactly, and so it could have been a sort of choice he has done in order really to focus on the spiritual belongings that they created anyway, or just because she was exactly someone who had to help him to achieve the spiritual perfection.
Right.
Idealized love.
Exactly,
Yeah,
it's
right.
an idealization. It's a source of inspiration to be and to do a better journey.
Right.
But sometimes happens to us too, especially when we are young, we meet someone and we realize, lucky us that sometimes if you don't find out, you still, think
Right.
that,
Right.
maybe that, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, they're not quite the same.
Right.
They don't do the,
Our separation of temporal, physical versus spiritual. We don't think about it.
yeah.
I think it has been very interesting for me to study and
And find out that it was very modern. We at school we didn't have this kind of key. Dante so progressive, so modern in the way in which he treats.
There were lots of followers, Catherine the Great loved Dante.
But also this fact of recognizing this sonnet in which he says, ladies, you who could understand what love is, you have the intellect to understand. I think it's a praise to women.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's very progressive in
Yeah.
terms of the role that the women were playing
At the time.
at that time. So,
Nothing, they were,
at the same
Yeah,
time
very old.
of choosing Beatrice as the guide in the heaven,
Yeah.
is an important role. So we saw, some progressive attitude in terms of the recognition of the role of women, of the capacity of women, but also the role that they have for men, for males, to help them to achieve something better, and something higher, something
Right.
spiritually extremely high, and to be with God in beatitude. And I think this is revolutionary at this time.
Yeah.
I'm sure even now.
And
some
even
people-
now, now we want to take for granted that, some steps have been done, some achievements, but at the same time, I think that in a situation like this
social and political situation in which he was living.
Now, there's a musical setting of Ethan Moore by Will Ferrari.
Yes,
Yeah, it's wonderful.
But is La Vita Nuova, is this poem
Yeah.
about that?
It's-
Thank you.
I got a more moments to make this number.
I'm going to get it.
I'll just give you my contact information, but we should put this again
Yeah.
at night.
We should do it in our living room or it's choir.
But do like a potluck where people bring Italian dishes.
Oh, really?
Italian